Millionaire just wanted a drink, but the encounter with a boy on the road changed everything. The boy was barefoot, sick, and ignored by everyone. All it took was a pair of sneakers to ignite a flame impossible to extinguish. Days later, the entire country watched the truth that no one wanted to see. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The midday sun beat down on the highway asphalt when Richard Parker pulled his Mercedes onto the shoulder. It wasn't the heat that bothered him, but the feeling of emptiness he'd been carrying in his chest for months. At 45, he had everything society considered success: a thriving business, homes in 3 states, bank accounts that never emptied. But there, alone in his car, he felt like a stranger in his own life. He had left Chicago without a specific destination, only with the desperate need to escape the suffocating routine. His financial consulting firm ran like a Swiss watch, even in his absence. His employees knew exactly what to do. Perhaps that was the problem. He had become dispensable even in his own life. His cell phone rang for the 10th time in an hour. The name Susan Wife flashed on the screen. Richard hung up without answering. The constant fights, the mutual accusations, the marriage that had transformed into a cold partnership of convenience. Susan had her own businesses, her own ambitions, and for a long time they had shared only the same roof and the same social appearances. That's when he saw the boy. On the other side of the road, a child of approximately 8 years was walking slowly along the roadside, barefoot. The small feet touched the hot ground carefully, as if each step was calculated to avoid the sharpest stones. Richard observed for a few minutes, waiting for an adult to appear. But the boy remained alone, carrying an empty water bottle in his hand. Without thinking much, Richard crossed the road. Traffic was light at that hour, and in a few steps he reached the other side. "Hi," he said, stopping a few meters from the child so as not to frighten him. "Is everything okay with you?" The boy looked up. Richard was impressed by the intelligence that shone in that gaze. There was no fear, only a cautious curiosity and a maturity that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "I'm going to get water for my grandma," the boy answered in a clear voice. "The faucet at home isn't working." Richard looked around. The landscape was arid, with few houses scattered in the distance. "And where are you going to get this water?" "At the gas station further ahead. Mr. Johnson always lets me fill my bottle there." The boy showed the plastic container he was carrying, "but today it's closed." "And you walked all the way here?" "Since morning." The boy didn't seem to be complaining, just stating the facts with a simplicity that touched something deep inside Richard. Richard looked at the child's bare feet. They were dirty, with small cuts and calluses that revealed long walks. Without hesitation, he took off his own sneakers. They were imported ones that had cost more than $1,000, but at that moment, they seemed insignificant compared to the need he saw before him. "Try these," said Richard, extending the sneakers to the boy. The child looked surprised. "But they're yours." "And now they're yours," Richard replied with a smile that he hadn't felt naturally emerge in a long time. "What's your name?" "Tommy." "Richard. Nice to meet you, Tommy." The boy put on the sneakers with reverent care. They were too big for his small feet, but he tied the laces skillfully as if handling a treasure. "Thank you, Mr. Richard." Tommy took some experimental steps, a shy smile lighting up his face. "I've never had sneakers like these." "Where do you live?" asked Richard. Tommy pointed in a vague direction. "Over there, with my grandma Martha, my mum. She isn't doing very well." There was something in the way the boy spoke that alerted Richard, their barely disguised sadness, a worry too heavy for such small shoulders. "Can I give you a ride home and we can stop at the gas station to get water?" Tommy hesitated for a moment, as if assessing the risks, but then nodded. "Grandma always says not to accept rides from strangers, but you gave me your sneakers. I think you're not a bad stranger." Richard laughed, a genuine laugh that echoed down the empty road. "Your grandmother is wise, and you are a very smart boy." On the way to the gas station, Tommy told about his life with a naturalness that impressed Richard. He had lived with his grandmother since he was little. His mother, Kimberly, had been sick for a few months. They couldn't schedule an appointment at the region's health clinic. There was always some problem. System down, doctor on vacation, no available slots. "And your father?" Richard asked delicately. "I don't have one." Tommy answered without bitterness, just as a fact of life. But I don't miss having one. Grandma Martha takes care of everything. Richard filled not just Tommy's bottle, but bought several water bottles, some food and basic medicines. Tommy observed each movement with attention, as if wanting to memorize this unexpected generosity. The family's house was in a small rural community, about 9 miles from the main road. It was simple but clean and well cared for. Richard immediately recognized the love that inhabited that place, in the small flowers planted in reused cans, in the washed clothes hanging on the line, in the careful arrangement of the few pieces of furniture. Martha greeted them at the door. She was a woman of about 60, grey hair tied in a bun, eyes that seemed to have seen much of life but still held a spark of hope. She wore a simple dress, mended in some places but impeccably clean. "Grandma, this is Mr. Richard," said Tommy proudly. "He gave me the sneakers and brought water for us." Martha looked Richard up and down, not with suspicion, but with the wisdom of someone who had learned to read people out of necessity. Her eyes lingered on the visitor's bare feet, and Richard saw a flash of understanding and gratitude cross her gaze. "Come in, please," she said in a soft but firm voice. "Anyone who takes off their own shoes to put them on a child's feet is welcome in our home." The interior of the house was even more modest than Richard had imagined, but it breathed dignity. In the small living room, there was only an old but well-preserved sofa, a center table made of painted white market crates, and some photographs on the wall showing Tommy at different ages, always smiling, always next to his grandmother. "Tommy told me your daughter isn't well," said Richard, accepting the glass of water that Martha offered him. The woman's face darkened slightly. "Kimberly is in the bedroom. It's been 2 months since she's been able to get up properly. She has body pains, weakness, a fever that comes and goes. We've tried to schedule an appointment at the clinic, but..." She made a gesture of discouragement. "There's always something. Can I help in some way?" Martha studied him for a long moment. "You did more than you should just by giving Tommy the sneakers. We don't want to be a burden to anyone." "It wouldn't be a burden," Richard answered sincerely. "Actually, I think you would be helping me." Tommy, who had gone to store the purchases, came running back. "Grandma, Mom wants to meet Mr. Richard." Martha hesitated, but then nodded. "She's weak, but she insisted." Richard was introduced to Kimberly, a woman of approximately 30 years, visibly debilitated, but with the same intelligent and gentle eyes as her son. She was lying on a simple bed, covered by a patchwork quilt that must have been made with much care. "Thank you," she said in a weak voice, "for what you did for Tommy, for the sneakers, for the water, for the kindness." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "It was little compared to what you've given me today." "And what did we give you?" asked Kimberly with a curious smile. Richard thought for a moment. "You reminded me of who I really am." That afternoon, Richard spent hours talking with the family. Tommy showed his drawings, made on reused wrapping paper. Martha told stories of her youth, when she worked in the fields and raised 5 children alone. Kimberly, even weakened, participated in the conversations with a gentle humor that illuminated the environment. When the sun began to set, Richard realized he had spent the most genuine hours he'd had in months. There, in that simple house, he had found something his money had never been able to buy. Genuine connection, purpose, the feeling that his presence really mattered. "I need to go," he said finally, "but I'd like to come back tomorrow if you'll allow me." "You will always be welcome," replied Martha, "but you don't need to worry about us." "It's not worry," Richard clarified, "it's gratitude." Tommy accompanied him to the car, still wearing the sneakers that were too big for him. "Mr. Richard, are you really coming back?" "Yes, I am. I promise. And when you come back, can you bring more stories from the big city? I like to imagine what it's like." Richard smiled, touched by the boy's innocent curiosity. "I can, and you can tell me more about life here. I'm learning a lot from you all." As he drove back to the main road, Richard felt a transformation happening inside him. The emptiness he carried in his chest hadn't completely disappeared, but now it had a name. It was the absence of true purpose. For years he had chased after numbers, spreadsheets, profits, forgetting that real life happened in encounters like that one. He decided to spend the night at a local inn. He didn't want to immediately return to Chicago, to the life that suddenly seemed artificial to him. He needed to process what had happened, to understand how such a simple gesture had so deeply affected his convictions. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed, Richard thought about Tommy walking barefoot along the dusty road, about Martha maintaining dignity even in scarcity, about Kimberly fighting against disease without adequate resources. He also thought about his own life, endless meetings about investments that didn't change anyone's life, empty social dinners, a marriage that had become an act. For the first time in a long time, Richard fell asleep with the feeling that tomorrow would bring something different, something that was really worthwhile. He didn't yet know that that casual encounter on the road would be just the first step of a journey that would transform not only his life, but would touch the hearts of thousands of people across the country. Richard woke up before the sun rose with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He had made a decision during the night. He would not return to Chicago as the same man. Something fundamental had changed within him, and he needed to honor that transformation. He drove to the nearest town, Stonebridge, in search of the health clinic that Tommy had mentioned. He wanted to understand why such a needy family couldn't get a simple medical appointment. What he found was a small, poorly maintained building with a line of people that stretched down the sidewalk from the early morning hours. Richard parked and walked to the entrance. The people in line observed him with curiosity. His expensive clothes contrasted with the simple environment, but he no longer cared about these differences. He approached a woman who was holding a child in her arms. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Do you know if it's possible to schedule an appointment for someone who is very sick?" The woman laughed bitterly. "Schedule an appointment? Son, I've been here since 5 in the morning and I'm 30th in line. If I'm lucky, I might get a slot for next week. If not, I'll come back tomorrow to try again. And if it's an emergency? Then you have to go to the big city if you have money for the private hospital. The public one there is also full." Richard talked with several people in the line and heard similar stories. Rural workers who lost days of work to get a consultation that could resolve in minutes. Children with simple problems that became complicated due to lack of preventive care. Elderly people who gave up on treatment because the system seemed more focused on discouraging them than helping them. He decided to enter the clinic to speak with someone in charge. The receptionist, a young woman with a tired appearance, attended to him with professional politeness. "I'd like to schedule an appointment for an acquaintance who is very debilitated," said Richard. "Insurance card?" Richard thought quickly. "I don't have it with me, but I can go get it." "Without a card, we can't schedule. And even with a card, we're scheduling for 3 weeks from now." "3 weeks? But it's an urgent case." The receptionist sighed. "Sir, everyone here is an urgent case. We have only 2 doctors to serve the entire region. If it's really an emergency, you have to go to the regional hospital. And if I want to pay privately, we don't attend private patients here. You'd have to go to the city." Richard left the clinic with a growing sense of indignation. How was it possible that in such a rich country, there were places where getting basic medical care was so difficult? He, who had always had premium health insurance and private doctors at his disposal, had never fully grasped this reality. He drove back to Martha's house with an idea formed. When he arrived, he found Tommy playing in the yard, still wearing the big sneakers. The boy ran to meet him with a radiant smile. "Mr. Richard, Grandma said you would come back, but I didn't quite believe it." "A promise is a promise," said Richard, hugging the boy. "And I brought a surprise." Richard had stopped at a pharmacy and bought some basic medications, vitamins and food supplements. He also brought fresh fruits and some simple toys for Tommy. Martha received them with the same hospitality as the day before, but Richard noticed worry in her eyes. "Kimberly got worse during the night," she whispered while serving coffee. "She had a high fever and some strong chest pains. I'm very worried." Richard didn't hesitate. "Let's take her to the hospital now." "My son," Martha spoke with gentleness, "we can't afford a private hospital and the public one." "I'll pay," interrupted Richard. "Please, let me help." The elderly woman studied him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this for us? You barely know us." Richard thought about the answer. "Because you showed me what really matters in life, and because it's the right thing to do." 2 hours later, Kimberly was being examined at the best private hospital in the region. Richard had insisted on taking her, even with the family's initial resistance. During the journey, Kimberly was so weak she could barely speak, but she held Tommy's hand tightly, as if wanting to transmit all her courage to her son. The diagnosis was revealed by the doctor after a series of tests. severe anemia, malnutrition, and signs of an infection that could have been easily treated if detected earlier. Kimberly would need to stay hospitalized for a few days to stabilize her condition. If you had waited a few more weeks, the doctor said to Richard in private, the case could have become much more complicated. That night, while Kimberly rested in the hospital under adequate medical care, Richard had dinner with Martha and Tommy at a simple restaurant in town. The grandmother had insisted on paying for her own meal, even knowing that Richard had enough resources to pay for 1,000 dinners like that one. "I don't accept charity," she had said firmly. "I accept help between friends, but not charity." Richard respected the woman's dignity and allowed her to pay her part. During dinner, Martha told more about her history. She had lost her husband young, raised 5 children working as a domestic worker and laundress. 4 children had migrated to big cities in search of opportunities. Only Kimberly had stayed, but she got pregnant early, and the child's father disappeared. "I don't hold grudges," said Martha. "Life teaches that carrying anger is like carrying stones in your backpack. It only weighs you down and serves no purpose." Tommy, who had been silent during the conversation, finally asked, "Mr. Richard, is my mum going to get better?" Richard looked into the boy's eyes and saw a deep fear, but also a touching trust. "Yes, Tommy. The doctors will take good care of her. And will you continue to be our friend?" The question hit Richard head-on. He realized he had become important to these people, but they had also become fundamental to him. "Always," he answered with certainty. During the following days, while Kimberly recovered in the hospital, Richard established a routine he never imagined having. He spent the mornings at the hospital monitoring the treatment. In the afternoon, he took Tommy to see the town, bought school supplies for him, encouraged him to draw and tell stories. At night, he talked at length with Martha, learning about a life wisdom that no university had taught. It was Martha who first noticed the change in him. "You're different," she observed one of those nights, "lighter, as if you've taken a weight off your shoulders." Richard reflected on the words. It was true. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely useful. He wasn't moving money from one place to another, wasn't optimizing profits for already rich businessmen. He was simply being present for people who needed him. The cell phone rang constantly. Susan, employees, partners, all wanted to know where he was, when he would return. Richard responded evasively, said he was resolving important personal matters and would return when necessary. On the 4th day of hospitalization, Kimberly was much better. Color had returned to her face. She could sit up in bed and talk normally. The doctor said she could be discharged in 2 more days, but recommended nutritional follow-up and periodic examinations. That's when Tommy asked the question that would change everything. "Mr. Richard," said the boy while visiting his mother, "why do some people get doctors quickly and others don't?" Richard looked at the 8-year-old boy, who was asking such a profound question about social inequality. "It's complicated, Tommy. But shouldn't it be the same for everyone? When someone is sick, shouldn't they be able to go to the doctor?" The simplicity of the child's logic was irrefutable. Richard realized he didn't have a satisfactory answer to give. That night, alone in his room at the inn, Richard made a decision that would completely alter the course of his life. He picked up his phone and called Susan. "Richard, finally, where are you? People are asking—" "Susan," he interrupted her, "I need to tell you some things, and I need you to listen carefully." Richard told her about meeting Tommy, about the family, about the difficulty of access to healthcare he had witnessed. Susan listened in silence, asking only a few practical questions. "Richard, I understand that you've been moved," she said finally, "but you can't solve the world's problems. Help this family, but don't forget your responsibilities. And if my responsibilities are changing—" "What do you mean?" Richard took a deep breath. "I mean that maybe I've spent my whole life focused on the wrong responsibilities. Maybe it's time to use everything I've built for something that really makes a difference." Susan was silent for a long moment. "Richard, you're going through a midlife crisis. It's normal. But don't make hasty decisions. It's not a midlife crisis, Susan. It's clarity." After hanging up, Richard stayed awake until late, elaborating a plan that was taking shape in his mind. He had resources, he had contacts, he had knowledge about how to make money work. What if he used all of that not to accumulate more wealth, but to solve real problems of real people? The next morning, during breakfast at the hospital with Tommy and Martha, Richard shared his idea. "I'm thinking of creating something," he said. "An organization that helps people like you to have access to healthcare. Not charity, but a system that really works." Martha looked at him with her wise eyes. "It's a beautiful idea, my son, but very big for just one person. That's why I won't do it alone. I'll need people who truly understand the problem. People like you." Tommy's eyes widened. "Are we going to help you?" "If you want to," smiled Richard. "Tommy, you can be my official consultant on what children really need." The boy was radiant with the idea of having an important role in his new friend's project. Martha smiled, but Richard noticed a concern in her gaze. "What is it, Martha?" "My son, sometimes the world doesn't want to be changed, and those who try to change it may face resistance." Richard nodded, understanding the wisdom behind the warning. "Then we'll have to be stronger than the resistance." At that moment, Kimberly entered the conversation, more animated than she had been in weeks. "What are you planning that got Tommy so excited?" Richard explained his idea to her too. Kimberly listened attentively, asking intelligent questions about how it would be possible to implement a better healthcare system for needy communities. "It's going to take a lot of work," she said finally, "and it's going to mess with a lot of powerful people who might not like the change." "Why do you say that?" Kimberly thought for a moment before answering. "Because if it were easy to solve, it would have been solved a long time ago. Sometimes the difficulty is not by chance." Kimberly's words planted a seed of reflection in Richard's mind. Perhaps the problem wasn't just about resources or organization. Perhaps there were interests behind maintaining that situation of neglect. But that only reinforced his determination to act. Tommy deserved to grow up in a world where having health didn't depend on luck or finding a generous stranger on the road. And Richard had found his true purpose, ensuring that other children wouldn't need to walk barefoot in the hope of finding help. 3 weeks after Kimberly was discharged from the hospital, Richard had completely transformed his life. He rented a house in the town of Stoneridge, transferred a large part of his business to trusted partners, and began to structure his new mission. He named the initiative Barefoot Shoes Foundation, a tribute to the encounter that had changed everything. Tommy had become his inseparable companion, accompanying Richard on visits to rural communities in the region. The boy had a natural talent for talking with other children and discovering their real needs. Kimberly, completely recovered, assumed the role of community coordinator, using her experience as a mother and neighbor to identify families who needed support. Martha, initially reluctant to get directly involved, ended up becoming the moral advisor of the project. "It's not enough to just give medicine," she would say. "You have to teach the person to take care of themselves, to value themselves. Dignity isn't given, it's built." The foundation started small, but with immediate impact. Richard funded a mobile health unit that visited rural communities 3 times a week. He hired 2 newly graduated doctors who were willing to work with a social purpose. He implemented a phone scheduling system that eliminated the endless lines. In 2 months, they had already attended to more than 300 people who never managed to access regular public services. The stories Richard heard daily convinced him more and more that he was on the right path. Children with vision problems who finally got glasses, elderly with diabetes who learned to control the disease, women who had access to preventive exams for the first time in their lives. Tommy had become a small local celebrity. People knew him as the boy with Mr. Richard's shoes, and he distributed smiles and information about the Foundation's services with enchanting naturalness. Richard was proud to see how the child had flourished with the new opportunities without losing his humble and generous essence. It was on a Thursday morning that the first signs of resistance appeared. Richard arrived at the Foundation's improvised office and found Dr. Mitchell, one of the hired doctors, with a worried expression. "Richard, I need to tell you something strange that happened yesterday." "What was it?" "I received a visit from an inspector from the State Medical Board. He said there was an anonymous complaint about irregularities in our service." Richard frowned. "What kind of irregularities?" "Illegal practice of medicine, lack of proper licenses, things like that. I had to show all my documents, explain our procedures. The guy was quite hostile." "And did he find any irregularities?" "No, everything is in order, but he made it clear he'll be keeping an eye on us." Richard felt a growing discomfort. "Has anyone else received visits like this?" "The pharmacy that supplies our medications said they were also approached by inspectors, and the laboratory that does our free exams received a routine audit last week. That afternoon, during a team meeting, other problems began to emerge. The company that rented the van for the mobile service had cancelled the contract without explanation. The bank that processed donations for the foundation was questioning all transfers, requesting additional documentation that made the process extremely slow. "This is not a coincidence," said Kimberly during a private conversation with Richard. "Someone is trying to make our work difficult. But who? And why?" Kimberly looked out the window, where Tommy was playing in the yard. "Richard, have you ever stopped to think that we might be interfering with the interests of powerful people?" "What do you mean?" "Think about it. If we can attend to 300 people in 2 months with limited resources, why can't the public system attend even 50? Is it just incompetence?" Richard had never thought from that angle. "You think there's some interest in keeping the system deficient?" "I don't know, but I know that when things work badly for a long time, there's always someone who benefits from that situation." The following week, the situation worsened. Richard received a visit from 2 men who identified themselves as representatives of the municipal health department. They were formal, but clearly hostile. "Mr. Parker," said the taller one, "we've heard about your activities in the region. We congratulate your intention to help, but we need to clarify some issues." "What issues?" "All public health activity must be coordinated with the competent authorities. You're creating a parallel system that can confuse the population." Richard kept his calm. "We're not creating a parallel system. We're offering services that the official system can't provide." "But this can create dangerous precedents," intervened the second man. "What if everyone started doing the same thing? The public system would lose its organization." "The public system lost its organization a long time ago," replied Richard, but immediately regretted the hostile tone. "Mr. Parker," said the first man with a cold smile, "we suggest that you work within the official channels. There are correct ways to contribute to public health." After the men left, Richard was thoughtful. Tommy, who had witnessed the conversation, approached him. "Mr. Richard, why were those men angry with us?" Richard looked at the boy who had changed his life. How to explain to an 8-year-old child that sometimes doing good bothers people who prefer things to remain bad? "Sometimes, Tommy, when we try to fix something that's broken, whoever broke it doesn't like it very much." "But did they break healthcare on purpose?" The boy's innocent question echoed in Richard's mind for days. He decided to investigate the health situation in the region more deeply. What he discovered shocked him. Consulting public documents and talking with discontented employees of the system, Richard discovered that there was a complex network of interests behind the chaos of local public health. Outsourced companies that received high values to provide low-quality services, managers who directed resources to private clinics of which they were partners. A scheme that worked perfectly: keep the public system deficient so that private services would be more valued. "It's worse than we imagined," said Richard to Kimberly and Martha during a night meeting at home. "It's not just incompetence, it's a system designed to fail." Martha sadly shook her head. "I always suspected. So much disorganization can't be by chance." "And now?" asked Kimberly. "If they have so much power, how are we going to face them?" Richard thought for a long moment. "By making even more noise. If they want us to stop, it's because we're on the right track." It was then that Richard made a risky decision. He decided to make public everything he had discovered. He contacted journalists, wrote detailed articles about the health situation in the region, and began to document all the success cases of the Barefoot Shoes Foundation. The response didn't take long. One Saturday morning, Richard arrived at the foundation's office and found the door broken down. Computers had been stolen, files scattered on the floor, medicines destroyed. On the wall, someone had spray-painted, "Stop before it's too late." Tommy, who had arrived with Richard, was frightened. "Mr. Richard, was it the bad men?" Richard hugged the boy, feeling a mixture of anger and determination. "I don't know who it was, Tommy, but I know we won't stop." "We won't? No way. People who do this to those who are trying to help only prove that our cause is just." That afternoon, something interesting happened. The news of the break-in spread quickly through the community. Instead of people staying away out of fear, dozens of volunteers appeared to help clean and reorganize the office. Martha arrived with a group of women who brought food and cleaning products. Dr. Mitchell came with medical colleagues who offered to work for free until the situation normalized. Tommy, initially frightened, soon recovered his energy and began to coordinate the activities of the other children, turning the cleaning into a kind of collective game. Richard was moved to see how an attempt at intimidation had transformed into a demonstration of solidarity. "They don't know who they're messing with," said Kimberly, sweeping glass shards from the floor. "This community has learned to defend itself." Martha approached Richard. "My son, I know you're scared, but remember, those who are right never fight alone." By the end of the day, the foundation was functioning again, but Richard knew that was just the beginning. If there really was an organized scheme to keep public health deficient, they wouldn't give up easily. That night, while Tommy slept on the couch after an exhausting day of helping with the reconstruction, Richard talked at length with Kimberly and Martha about the future. "We can stop now," he said. "We've already helped many people. I don't want to put you in danger." "Richard," said Kimberly firmly, "my son asked today why some people don't want others to be helped. I didn't know how to answer, but I know that if we stop now, he'll grow up believing that the bad guys always win." Martha nodded. "And I didn't raise that boy for him to learn that we give up at the first difficulty." Richard looked at Tommy sleeping peacefully, still wearing the sneakers that had started that whole story. The boy trusted him, believed that adults could make the world better. How could he disappoint such pure trust? "Then we continue," said Richard, with renewed determination. "But now we'll do it differently. We'll make so much noise that they won't be able to silence us in secret anymore." He didn't know yet, but his decision not to back down would trigger a series of events that would transform not only their lives, but would mobilize people across the country. The barefoot boy he had found on the road was about to become the symbol of a much larger fight for dignity and social justice. Richard's decision to make his fight public changed everything. Instead of retreating after the intimidation, he did exactly the opposite. He decided to tell the complete story, from the casual encounter with Tommy to the discovery of the corruption network that kept public health deficient. The first step was to create a simple video. Richard, Tommy, and Martha sat in the yard of the house where it all began and told their stories to the camera. Tommy, having just turned 9, spoke with a touching naturalness about what it was like to live without access to healthcare, about walking barefoot in search of help, about finding a man who changed his life just by choosing to be human. "I don't understand why some people don't want others to be helped," Tommy said to the camera, repeating the question he had asked his mother. "If someone is sick, isn't it right to help?" The video was posted on social media with the title, "The Sneakers Boy, a True Story About Dignity and Hope." Richard expected a few hundred views, perhaps 1,000 at most. In 48 hours, the video had been seen by more than 500,000 people. The comments were moving. People from all over the United States shared similar experiences of neglect in public health, but also stories of overcoming and solidarity. Doctors offered to help voluntarily. Lawyers wanted to prosecute those responsible for corruption. Business people proposed partnerships to expand the foundation. Tommy was fascinated by the repercussion. "Mr. Richard, there are people in New York who know our story." "There are people all over the world, Tommy. The internet connects everyone." "And will they help other children like me?" "Many of them will, yes." That's when Jennifer Wilson appeared, an investigative journalist from Chicago who specialized in corruption in public health. She had seen the video and decided to investigate the case of Stone Ridge more deeply. "Your discoveries are just the tip of the iceberg," said Jennifer during a conversation with Richard. "This scheme is repeated in hundreds of counties across the country. There's a health mafia that profits from people's suffering." Jennifer brought a reporting team and spent a week documenting everything: the difficulties of the public system, the work of the Barefoot Shoes Foundation, the testimonies of the people benefited, and the evidence of corruption that Richard had collected. The report aired on a Sunday night, on the main news program of American television. Tommy appeared walking along the same road where Richard had found him, now wearing his own sneakers, but telling how his life was before meeting Mr. Richard. "I walked very far to get water," Tommy said to the cameras. "My feet hurt, but I didn't complain because Grandma Martha said complaining doesn't solve anything. Then Mr. Richard appeared and gave me his sneakers, but the real gift wasn't the sneakers. It was him seeing that I was there." Tommy's phrase became a meme on social networks, The real gift wasn't the sneakers, it was him seeing that I was there. People began to use the hashtag #ChockSeeThem to denounce cases of neglect and abandonment. Martha, initially shy in front of the cameras, revealed herself to be a natural speaker. "We don't want charity," she said with her simple wisdom. "We want dignity. We want to be treated like people, not like problems." The repercussion was immediate and intense. The Federal Attorney's Office opened an investigation into corruption in the region's health system. The Government Accountability Office sent auditors to examine public contracts. Dozens of counties with similar problems were included in the investigation. But the most beautiful response came from ordinary people. Inspired by Tommy's story, thousands of Americans began to create their own Barefoot Shoes foundations in their communities. Doctors organized to offer free care. Pharmacies created subsidized medication programs. Business leaders directed investments to social projects in the health area. A spontaneous movement formed across the country. People began to leave sneakers at donation points with notes saying, "For those who need to walk with dignity." Children in private schools organized campaigns to collect footwear for needy communities. The simple act of putting shoes on feet became a symbol of care and solidarity. Richard was moved to see how the simple gesture of giving his sneakers to Tommy had multiplied into millions of acts of kindness across the country. But the true transformation wasn't just in the numbers or the repercussion. It was in the lives that were touched and changed. Kimberly, who was now completely recovered, decided to study nursing to be able to professionally help other people in situations similar to what she had experienced. "I want to give back the care I received," she said. "I want to be a bridge between those who need and those who can help." Tommy, who had involuntarily become a small celebrity, maintained his humble essence. He continued playing, studying, helping his grandmother with household chores. But now he had a project. He wanted to be a doctor when he grew up to take care of children who didn't have access to healthcare. "I don't want other children to have to walk barefoot like I did," he said during an interview. "I want to be there when they need me." Martha became a kind of national advisor to the movement. People from all over the country sought her advice on how to implement social projects in their communities. She responded with the same simplicity and wisdom she had always shown. "It doesn't have to be a big thing," she would say. "It needs to be genuine. If you really want to help, start by seeing who is beside you. The rest happens naturally." Richard saw his life completely transformed. His businesses, once the center of his existence, became just tools to finance social projects. He and Susan divorced amicably, recognizing that they had different views on the purpose of life. She continued to manage the traditional businesses. He dedicated himself entirely to social projects. 1 year after the encounter on the road, Richard organized a special event. He invited all the people who had been benefited by the Barefoot Shoes Foundation for a celebration at the same place where he had met Tommy. More than 1,000 people attended. Families who had received medical care, children who got sneakers, elderly who got medications, doctors who joined the movement. Tommy, now 10 years old, gave a speech that moved all those present. "When I met Mr. Richard, I only needed sneakers, but he gave me much more than that. He gave me the certainty that there is always someone willing to help. There is always a way to make things better. Now I know that I can also be that person for another child." The movement continued to grow. 3 years later, there were more than 500 Barefoot Shoes centers spread across the United States. The model created by Richard had been replicated and adapted to different regional realities. Corruption in public health hadn't disappeared, but now it faced organized resistance and constant vigilance. Tommy, at 13, continued to be the emotional heart of the movement. He had maintained his humility and generosity, but had also developed an impressive social consciousness. He participated in conferences on children's rights, inspired other young people to engage in social causes, but never lost his love for drawing and playing. Martha, now 65, had become a national reference in community development. Universities invited her for lectures. Governments asked for her consulting. But she continued to live in the same simple house, taking care of the same flowers, offering fresh water to those who passed on the road. Kimberly had graduated as a nurse and worked as a community health coordinator in 5 counties in the region. Her experiences as a patient had made her an exceptionally sensitive professional to people's real needs. She had married Dr. Mitchell, the doctor she met at the foundation, and they were expecting their first child. Richard, now 50, discovered that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts, but in the genuine relationships he had built. He lived in a simple house next to the family that had changed his life. Tommy called him Uncle Richard. Martha treated him like a son, Kimberly like a brother. He had found the family he never knew he was looking for. In his moments of reflection, Richard sometimes returned to the exact spot where he had first met Tommy. The road remained the same, but everything around had changed. There was a new school, a properly functioning health clinic, better houses, children playing safely. But the most important transformation had happened inside him. The empty and disillusioned man who stopped his car on that hot afternoon had disappeared. In his place, there was someone who knew his purpose, who knew exactly why he woke up every morning, who had found meaning in a life dedicated to genuine service. In the last scene of this true story, Richard was sitting on the porch of his house, watching Tommy teach other children how to play soccer. The boy, now a teenager, continued to wear simple sneakers, but his feet never again touched the ground out of necessity. Martha approached with 2 glasses of fresh lemonade. "What are you thinking about, my son?" Richard smiled, accepting the glass. "I was thinking that sometimes we spend our whole lives looking for a miracle without realizing that we ourselves can be someone's miracle." "That's true," agreed the wise lady. "And sometimes the miracle begins with something very simple, like a pair of sneakers, like seeing that there is someone there." Tommy came running to them, sweaty from playing, with the radiant smile he had never lost. "Uncle Richard, tell the children how we met." Richard laughed, hugging the boy who had become the center of his life. "Again, Tommy? You must know this story by heart already. But they like to hear it, and I like to remember." Richard began to tell once more the story of the casual encounter that changed everything. The children listened attentively, as they always did. Some were children of families that had been helped by the foundation. Others were from neighboring communities who had heard about the movement. When Richard finished the account, a 7-year-old girl raised her hand. "Mr. Richard, if I find a barefoot child, should I give her my shoes?" Richard looked at the girl with affection. "The most important thing isn't giving your shoes, dear. It's seeing that she is there. The rest happens naturally." The girl nodded seriously. "I understand. First see, then help." "That's right." Tommy got up and ran back to play. Richard observed the boy he had found on a dusty road, walking barefoot in search of water. Now he was a confident, generous young man, full of dreams and determination to make the world better. "Thank you, Tommy," whispered Richard, knowing the boy couldn't hear him. "Thank you for teaching me to see." The sun was setting when the children finally dispersed, each returning home with stories to tell and dreams to nourish. Richard remained on the porch, feeling a deep peace he had never imagined possible. 5 years had passed since that casual encounter on the road. Thousands of lives had been touched, hundreds of social projects had been born, healthcare systems had been reformed. But for Richard, the greatest transformation had happened within himself. He had learned that true wealth isn't measured in possessions, but in purpose. That real success isn't in how much you accumulate, but in how much you transform. That genuine happiness is born when we discover that our life can serve something greater than ourselves. And it had all begun with a simple gesture, stopping the car to talk to a barefoot child on the road. That night, before sleeping, Richard wrote in his diary, "Today marks exactly 5 years since I met Tommy. If someone had told me back then that a barefoot boy would completely change my life, I wouldn't have believed it. But that's what happens when we choose to really see the people around us. The world transforms, and we transform with it." Tommy knocked on the bedroom door. "Uncle Richard, can I come in?" "Of course, Tommy." "What is it?" The young man sat on the bed with a serious expression. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For stopping that afternoon, for seeing me, for changing our lives." Richard felt his eyes water. "Tommy, who changed whose life was you? You taught me what really matters." Tommy smiled. "Then we taught each other." "That's true." The boy gave Richard a tight hug and left the room. Richard remained there in the night silence, thinking about how a simple decision can completely alter the course of an existence. Outside, the same road where everything had begun continued to wind through the landscape. But there were no more barefoot children walking alone. There were cared-for families, strengthened communities, people who had learned to see each other. And somewhere in the United States that same night, there was certainly someone stopping their car to help a person in need. The movement initiated by a pair of sneakers continued to spread, silently, transforming lives one at a time. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Richard, Tommy, and Martha has touched your hearts as much as it touched ours. To continue this emotional journey of transformative stories, we've prepared a special playlist with equally inspiring narratives about solidarity, hope, and the power of simple gestures. You can find it by clicking here. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate the best of human nature and remind us that small gestures can generate great transformations. Don't miss our upcoming content and come share with us in the comments how this story inspired you to better see the people around you. Until the next story.